Let's cover how a merchant or any organization assesses itself in terms of PCI DSS compliance. There are usually two major mechanisms: the ROC, or Report on Compliance, and the SAQs, or Self-Assessment Questionnaires. But these are very different in nature. They're for different types of merchants, and even within SAQs, there is a little bit of complexity there. So let's take a moment just to review the assessment process itself. In terms of assessing yourself as an organization for PCI DSS, there are two major possibilities for what is required: a self-assessment questionnaire, or SAQ, or a report on compliance, or ROC, which involves a physical visit from a qualified assessor. The major differences between both is that the SAQs are performed by the organization itself. You fill the questionnaire and you deliver it to your bank. They're simpler and faster, while reports on compliance have to be performed by a qualified security assessor, or QSA. Naturally, as you're thinking, the SAQ route is a lot less costly and demands less work. And the major criterion that defines whether an organization needs a report on compliance or whether an SAQ is acceptable is being a level 1 merchant, having over 60 million transactions per year. If you are level 1, you must take a report on compliance. Let's cover the 4 merchant levels very quickly. Level 1 merchants are the biggest. They process more than 60 million transactions per year. Level 2 merchants process between 15 million and 60 million transactions per year. Level 3 merchants are between 20,000 and 15 million. And level 4 are the smallest, less than 20,000 per year. As mentioned, any merchant from level 2 through 4 can perform a self-assessment questionnaire, which is submitted to their acquiring bank. Or if they're payment providers, this is delivered to the card company itself. But level 1 merchants must take a report on compliance, performed by a QSA and involving on-site inspection. Now here is the thing: even for these merchants from level 2 to 4, taking the SAQ itself is not that simple. And the reason for this is that there are 8 types available, and these depend on the type of organization and how they handle cardholder data. There's a few groups for merchants that handle card non-present transactions versus card-present transactions, and 2 types which are global. So first, for card not present transactions, the first is the SAQ way, which is for fully outsourced payments. You have a website that redirects to PayPal, for example, and the SAQ AEP, which is for partially outsourced merchants. This is, for example, where you do have a third party for payments, but you communicate the card data through an HTTP post request, for example, so it does pass by a website. That's the difference between these two. We'll take a look at this in more detail later on, but a rule of thumb is that websites are either SAQ-A, SAQ-AEP, or SAQ-D. You immediately fall into SAQ-D if you store card data. Otherwise, you fit into one of these previous ones. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Next comes the SAQ-C. So these are payment apps connected to the internet. They're not websites per se, but they're specific applications that are simply connected to the internet for only one purpose: to communicate transactions. For example, the SAQ CVT in specific is for isolated virtual payments by mail or telephone. Think of someone in a call center that's taking in credit card data over the phone and posting that on a website through a very specific secure connection. Then, for card-present transactions, we have first the SAQB, which is for old machines, really. It's for imprint machines that take a carbon copy of your card very old ones, or terminals that are connected by dial connections. For example, in small newspaper shops, the SAQ BIP is for PTS-approved terminals that connect through an IP connection, therefore the IP. These are approved by PTS standards, and they're payment terminals that connect via IP, via an internet connection. Then we have the SAQ P2PE. This is for hardware terminals that are managed by P2PE systems, or peer-to-peer encryption systems. These terminals are special. They use strong encryption and they have their own SAQ. They're kind of the sophisticated version of these two. And then we have the catch-all categories, SAQD. This is the category for merchants or providers that don't fit any other category. If you can avoid being categorized as SAQD, you are going to want that, because we'll see this in a minute. But while every other one of these has between 40 and 80 questions, the SAQD has around 300. That's right. And out of curiosity, if you store card data, you immediately jump to this category. Every other category is for devices or systems that only transmit card data and don't store it. So the SAQD can be for service providers, which are, for example, providers of machines, payment terminals, and so on, and the SAQD for merchants, which are all merchants that don't fit into any of the previous categories. So it's important to note that different SAQ types demand compliance with different requirements, and they also have a different total number of questions. For example, the SAQ for the peer-to-peer encryption machines only fits requirements 3, 9, and 12, which are respectively to store data securely, to restrict physical access, and to have an information security policy. They're payment machines, so other requirements, including firewalls and antivirus, just don't apply to them. So although we will cover the 12 requirements in this course, depending on your SAQ, you may not need to obey all of them. So the SAQ-A for outsourced payments has to comply with requirements 2, 8, 9, and 12. That is related to vendor defaults, access control, user identification, physical access control, and an information security policy. And it only has 22 questions. If you use a third party for all payments, there's not a lot that you have to answer. The SAQ AEP is different. It has to comply with all 12 requirements, and it has 193 questions. So the difference between fully integrating a third party for payments or partially integrating it is quite big. Then the SAQ-B, which is for imprint machines and dial-out terminals, has requirements 3, 4, 7, 9, and 12, which have to do with securing stored data, securing transmitted data, logical access control, physical access control, and having an information security policy. And it's just 41 questions. If it's a terminal that connects by IP, then you have all requirements except 5 and 10, and the questions are 84. The SAQ-C, which is for payment apps connected to the internet, naturally has all requirements and 162 questions. And the SAQ-CVT, which is for phone or mail orders that use a web portal, has less questions, 81 in specific, because it's a specific type, and 1 less requirement. The SAQD, as we mentioned, is the worst case scenario. If you get included in this category, you comply with all 12 requirements and you answer 332 questions, whether as a merchant or payment provider. And finally, the SAQ for peer-to-peer encryption hardware machines only complies with requirements 3, 9, and 12, which is storing encrypted data, physical protection of the data, and having an information security policy. And it only contains 33 questions. And by the way, you can come back to this slide after we've covered the requirements, And there are many other variations of this table online. But if anything, what I want you to take away is that how you transmit and store data immediately affects the type of questionnaire that you can fill. It has implications in terms of your compliance and the actual work in filling these questionnaires. We can also go a little bit deeper into the categories before finishing the lesson. So category A, as mentioned, is fully outsourced e-commerce merchants. So your website doesn't touch cards. All the processing of payments is done either through an iframe or a redirect to a third party. And this is the most straightforward type of SAQ. Merchants aim to be in this category. Then SAQ AEP, as mentioned, is partially outsourced web portals. So the card data is not stored, but it is transmitted. And just that fact imposes a lot of compliance on you. You may be using, for example, an HTTP post form to redirect to the third party. In this scenario, no card data even passes through your system. In this scenario, it may pass only in one type of request, but that's enough to change the category. SAQB, as mentioned, is for the old machines. So these are dial-out merchants, for example, which are chip or pin devices connected via phone, or old in-print machines which take a carbon copy of the credit card. None of these store information, and in these cases, the physical security of the machines or paper copies is the focus. So the PCI DSS focus both on digital security and physical security, and this is one category where digital security is almost irrelevant. There's no databases, no digital transmission. However, the physical copies have to be secured as well. Then, SAQ BIP is exactly the same as for this one, but it's for standalone payment terminals or chip devices that use an IP connection. So there's an additional focus on everything else related to internet communication. So firewalls, encrypted storage, encrypted transmission, the only two that are not included are antivirus and penetration testing. And I'm guessing that's because the machines don't need them. If they did, those requirements would be here as well. Then, CVT as a subcategory of SAQC is for web-based virtual terminals. These are terminals that you see in shops or call centers where there is direct entry of payment information. The person takes the credit card details and inputs them in a console. But it's not a browser, it's one specific connection through one specific device. The card data is also not stored. By the way, as I mentioned, if any merchant stores data, they immediately get slotted into D. So for CVT, this device, naturally, must be isolated in the network, because otherwise the rest of the network where the device is in becomes in scope of the PCI DSS, which is something that you don't want. You want the card data environment to be only this network with only this connection. Then, category C are payment app systems that are connected to the internet. So the payment processing is in the device itself. It's not an internet app, but the device connects to the internet. There's also no storage. Then, SAQD, as mentioned, is the kitchen sink. All other merchants and all payment provider brands land here. It's important to note, as mentioned, that any merchant that stores data immediately lands in this category. For example, e-commerce merchants are usually A, AEP, or D. If they fully outsource their payment, they're A. If they partially outsource it, they're AEP. If they store card data, they are D. And as mentioned, category P2PE, HW, is for merchants that have hardware payment terminals, but specific ones, PCI validated, peer-to-peer encryption, chip, or PIN devices. And again, no card data storage, otherwise they would be category D. It's important to note in closing that an organization may meet multiple criteria for multiple SAQs. For example, if they have multiple payment systems, which are different. And in that case, they must take all of the corresponding SAQs in that case. This is completely normal and it occurs. So if you have both a website that is partially outsourced and a hardware peer-to-peer encryption machine, you must fill both SAQ AEP and SAQ P2PE. It's also important to note that selecting the wrong SAQ for an organization may result in failing PCI DSS compliance. This is because usually when you fill the wrong questionnaire, you may ignore requirements that actually apply to you. So you may fill an SAQ that doesn't have requirement 1 about firewalls, but it actually applies to you. So you fail because you don't fill it. Out of curiosity, if you choose an SAQ that is more inclusive, you don't fail because you're complying with everything you need and more. But usually, when people fail, it's because they choose an SAQ that is simpler, not more complex. And the consequences of failing PCI DSS can range from something called compensating controls, which is when the assessor recommends extra measures for you to be able to comply. For example, if your firewall is fine, but you don't use change management for the rules, they may suggest that as a compensating control. To other consequences, such as fines, or even removal of payment brand association. So in severe cases, for example, Visa may turn to a merchant and say, you can't take Visa cards for payment anymore. But even if there's nothing else, you may just waste time filling the wrong SAQ. Because remember, the number of questions can range from 30 to around 300. If instead of taking an SAQ with 40 questions, you take SAQD with 330, you almost answer 10 times as many questions for no purpose. What are some examples here? The first is that validation may be required in some cases. As I mentioned, banks request the SAQ to be filled by their merchant. But if the bank has suspicions of a specific merchant client, or if they just want to be extra sure, they may request the SAQ to be validated by a qualified security assessor. Then, as mentioned, website merchants are usually A, AEP, or D. If all payments are outsourced, they're A. If all payments are mostly outsourced, they're AEP. And if they store card data of any sort, they immediately go into category D. And finally, remember that the levels of merchants are based on transactions and not value. Level 1 means over 60 million in yearly transactions, and the value doesn't matter. They may be transactions of 1 million each or $1 each. This is because when hackers get credit card information, it's usually worth the same. Whether you made a $1 purchase or a $100 purchase, the credit card is worth the same to the hacker. This is why the focus is on transactions, because it's the number of credit cards that is exposed if there is no security. What are our key takeaways here? The first is that in order to be assessed, merchants will fit one of 4 levels, and only level 1 merchants with more than 60 million yearly transactions must take a report on compliance with a physical visit from the QSA, or Qualified Security Assessor. All other merchants can get away with filling an SAQ and delivering it to their bank. Then there are 8 different SAQs. Depending on their activities, merchants usually take one of these 8. You have A and AEP for websites with outsourced payments. You have B or BIP for what I call old machines, dial-out terminals, imprint machines, IP terminals, then C and CVT for isolated virtual terminals, and then D for everything else. You also have P2PE for specific peer-to-peer encrypted payment machines. And finally, there are different requirements depending on the SAQ that you fill. So merchants may not have to comply with all 12 requirements. This has to do with their types of systems and networks. For example, if you only use payment terminals and no physical servers, then requirement 5 about having an antivirus doesn't make sense. So as we see, assessment is not trivial. If you are a level 1 merchant, it is a little bit more trivial. You need a report on compliance, period. But if you are not a level 1 merchant, you need to take an SAQ and usually deliver it to your acquiring bank. But there are 8 different types of SAQs, and hopefully you are not going to land on the SAQD.